Students, we are at, believe it or not, our final lecture in the Escape from Reason series. If you'll permit me, just a personal aside here, I've already acknowledged the great mentors in my life, A. Hugh Graham, my late father, R.C. Sproul, Francis Schaeffer. I don't know that I've mentioned Alvin Plantinga. He's been a little bit more of a recent influence, though he's been around for a long time. I really wish that I had discovered him much earlier in life. His classic work, God and Other Minds, that was published in 1968, really started a movement in colleges and universities where it's resulted in a lot more Christian influence in our culture because it's influenced a lot of Christians to become involved not only in philosophy but to rise to the level of chairman or chairpersons of those particular divisions of higher ed. William Lane Craig, another one I wish I had discovered a long time ago, but it's been much more recent. Again, this is kind of a personal aside, obviously, but if you would indulge me on this, I want to give you a little bit more of a background. This is the late Francis Schaeffer. I discovered him, one of his books in college at a local bookstore across the way from what's today the University of North Texas. And his book, He Is There and He Is Not Silent, impacted me tremendously. It's amazing how people who write books can have such a far-ranging influence. I had the pleasure of not only meeting him in later years, had the privilege of studying with him when he would come to Dallas periodically to do some workshops and seminars that primarily revolved around his books. So the late great Francis Schaeffer, I want to give him a tip of the hat. Again, all of these I've mentioned, Dr. R.C. Sproul, he's especially significant here because much of this material that we've been reviewing, I have taken straight from him. I've added a few things here and there, but he's the one who really has assembled this material on the laws of logic. I mentioned Dr. William Lane Craig, discovered him, as I said, more recently. If you get a chance, hop on YouTube and search for his name. His organization, Reasonable Faith, has uploaded so many of his videos regarding his debates, interviews, his teachings. I really believe he is the foremost Christian, what we might call an apologist today, but what we actually mean is somebody who's advocating and defending the Christian faith. He's a terrific resource for you. And then Alvin Plantinga, he's getting on in years, so he's not near as active as he used to be, and I really regret that. But again, a number of YouTube videos out there on Alvin Plantinga that feature him and his books. I mentioned God and Other Minds, and there are many, many others. They're well worth checking out, and I'll be glad to post more information on his books and some of these other mentors that I have in the future. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my late father again, A. Hugh Graham. Uh, this is him. And as you can see here in the picture, a very young picture of me. I always admired him. I always wanted to be just like him. And I think that's probably the primary reason that I went into teaching and teaching at Southwestern Christian College because he taught here starting back in the early 1950s. He was a real pioneer in race relations, in really being convinced that people have a duty to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to receive a great education, regardless of your race or background or ethnicity or any of these things. And so, growing up in that household with him, of course, I greatly admired him. I mentioned his background here at Southwestern Christian College. Here's a picture of him conducting the Southwestern Chorus way back in the day. This looks like about mid 70s to me. There's Patricia Evans, who was the soloist in residence. That's the wife of the former president, Jack Evans, Southwestern Christian College, who served as president close to 47 years. He holds, I think he had the seventh longest tenure as a college president in the history of this country. And Patricia Evans, incredibly talented soloist. And I'm grateful that she's still with us today. And I consider her a very close friend as well as Jack Evans. I just want to make this tribute. to my late father and how much he inspired me. And thank you so much for permitting me the time to do this with you. By the way, on campus, if you look at the big auditorium, it's got three names on it. It's called the Graham Kennedy Farmer Auditorium. That first name is his, and my name as well, but it's dedicated to him way back in 1974. I was there for that particular dedication, came home from college just to see it. So he's had a lasting impact on Southwestern Christian College, and I'm grateful for that. All right, with that finished, you'll recall these very powerful tools, the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, causality, basic reliability of sense perception, and the analogical use of language. And we're using these tools here to just demonstrate to you how valuable these are in when we're talking about the big questions in life, the things that give us meaning and value and purpose. And so this is not just an academic exercise. Not only will these tools help you in writing your paper, but really with the very deepest questions of life. So for instance, let's talk about how we got here. You know, the theory of origins is one of the most challenging and pressing issues in our world today, and to a certain extent, it's always been. But when we talk about how did everything come to be? Why is there something rather than nothing? How did the universe, why is there a universe and why is there just maybe just nothing? Well, people have speculated on this, and basically there's only four possibilities as to how everything came to be. And by everything, of course, I mean the universe here. The universe is not everything, but you know what I mean, the material universe. So there's basically four theories of origins. This has to do with that big word ontology that we introduced those many lectures ago. If we believe the universe is real, if we believe that we're real, why are we here? How did we get here? The first thing that people have speculated on is, well, maybe it's not here. Maybe the universe is just an illusion. Maybe we're just imagining that there's a universe and that there's other people and there's other things. Some have speculated, okay, well, the universe is here because it created itself. It's self-created. The other theory is, well, maybe the universe is here because it's always been here. It's eternal. The universe is self-existent. And then finally, the fourth and final theory, and this pretty much exhausts everything. No one's really come up with anything besides these four that I know of. The universe was created by something that is self-existent. The universe is not self-existent, but it was created by a self-existent being, a mind. Had to be something with a mind because only minds create things. They have intentionality and coming up with the plan. It has to exist in somebody's mind before it can actually exist. Now, as we look at the idea, maybe the universe is just an illusion. Well, I love the movie The Matrix because it deals with exactly this issue. Keanu Reeves here discovers one day that the life he's been living really doesn't even exist. His job, all the things that he thought were real, the guy who ends up being his mentor, Lawrence Fishburne here, ends up explaining to him that this is just an illusion that's been created by aliens in order to harvest our fluids and our parts and things like this. So it's all been this diabolical plan. But once he understands what is reality, he discovers that he's able to tap into this power and he has all of these abilities that he never would have guessed. And he can do things that otherwise would have been impossible in what he thought was the real world and reality. But when we look at this, we have to think, even if this universe is an illusion, and I don't believe that it is, but even if it was, would that mean that there's no such thing as reality? Well, no. In this movie, there still was a reality. It's just he had to discover it. Lawrence Fishburne's character had to teach him, and that's why they called it the Matrix. So even if we're talking about something being an illusion, it doesn't do away with the fact that there is something that is real. We just may not have discovered it yet. So this is where some of these possibilities now that we look at drift into irrationality. Even smart people in our culture advocate some of these things, but when we examine them closely, we see that they're irrational. For instance, people who say, well, maybe the universe created itself. But the thing is, if the universe created itself, then there's no such thing as cause and effect. everything we see was just self-created, and so if the effect exists before the cause, then everything we believe about cause and effect, and that seems to be true at least, is not true. But as we've seen, the law of cause and effect is very real, and without it, there are many things that just simply don't make sense. The other thing we have to understand is that if the universe created itself, it creates other problems. We'll look at that in just a second. What about maybe the universe has always been here? Now, interestingly, this is what the scientific community has always believed up until recently. The universe is just eternal. It's always been here, so it really doesn't need an explanation. It's just self-existent. There are some things, though, that we know, again, that the best science we have today tells us that this can't possibly be the case. For instance, you may have heard of the term entropy. You can look that one up if you want, entropy. It says that all of the usable energy in the universe is slowly being used up. Compare it to something like, let's say that the weather's very cold outside and you turn on the central air and heat and you use the heat to heat the room up. Well, what happens if you turn off the central air and heat? Well, eventually all of that heat dissipates, it goes away because the cold begins to overpower it, so to speak. That's probably not the best explanation, but you get the idea. This is what's basically happening to the universe. The suns are burning out, and eventually, in so many billion years, the universe would die of heat death. Now, that being the case, if the universe has been around forever, we have to ask ourselves, why hasn't it already died of heat death, so to speak? Well, it would have if the universe has been around forever. So obviously, this is evidence that the universe had a beginning and it is winding down, but it's not there yet because it started a finite time ago. The universe had a finite beginning at a particular point in the past. We also have to ask ourselves, since the universe is composed of matter in motion, we have a bunch of material things that are in movement. Our world is constantly moving, rotating. The galaxy is rotating, moving. The universe is expanding. You may or may not have been aware of that. I think probably most of you are. But we can look out and see the redshift in the light out there and the microwave radiation. We can observe all this scientifically, and we know that everything is moving gradually apart from each other, and it's actually speeding up. So we have to ask ourselves, where did motion originate? For motion to start, something has to kick it off, like that row of dominoes. You tip the first one at the end of the row, then one domino will fall, the next one will fall, the next one will fall, and so until it finally gets to the end. But in order for those dominoes to be falling, that first one had to tip. Where did it originate? So we know the universe hasn't been around forever because at some point that first domino had to tip. We also know that things in the universe depend upon something else for their existence. You came along because of your parents. Your parents came along because of their parents. Their parents came along because of their parents. Okay. And so something, in order for us to avoid what we called earlier in this series, an infinite regress, something had to start it off. There had to be some self-existent something in order for all of the contingent things that we see in the universe. By contingent, once again, we just mean things that depend upon something else. They couldn't have come into existence without something else. There had to be some self-existent something in the beginning that explains all of that. Now, again, people may say, well, why can't that just be the universe? Well, because the universe is composed of those contingent or dependent things. So we know that it can't be the universe. The universe can't be the self-existent thing.